Hello and welcome back to the channel, and welcome back to my journey with the Lotus Esprit S3. Today I'm in my new overalls, which I bought for two reasons. One, I was a bit fed up with having to keep sort of changing in and out of scruffs. These I can just slip over whatever I'm wearing. And secondly, I want to be able to do a little bit more to this car myself. So over the last 6 to 8 months I've spent a lot of money on this car, and I'm just thinking a good 2/3 of it has been on labour. For specialist work. So when you're paying that kind of money, it's always good to be able to try and do a few things yourself. So today I'm going to be changing the front discs, or front brake rotors as some people call them. And what happened was, during the rebuild I actually had some new brake discs for the front. They were put on, but they just made the brakes judder, and it turned out that the run out on them was way beyond what it should have been. So they went back and I've got a replacement set. Now I've already paid, effectively, I've already paid specialists to put on the set of discs, take them off and put the old ones back on again. So I really don't want to pay a third time for someone to put them on for me. So I'm going to have a go myself. I've read up on it. It looks pretty straightforward, might be a few gotchas in there, but I'll see how I get on. Okay, let's get started. So first of all, I've jacked up the car at the front and I've got it on axle stands on both sides. Obviously we're going to be doing both sets of front discs. In terms of equipment, we've got what we've got there: a pair of gloves, torque wrench, socket set. So we've got a couple of sockets there, or 2 or 3 sockets, different sizes, spanner of a different size. I'll list all these in the description below, if you're bothered. Got some brake pad spreaders, rubber mallet, lamp screwdriver, pliers, and then brake cleaner, penetrating fluid, and grease, and some wipes. So first thing we've got to do is get off the wheel. Before I jacked the car up, I obviously slackened off the wheel bolts, which makes life a bit easier. Obviously if you've got either a windy gun or you've got a battery one, it makes this particular job a bit quicker. So I'm actually going to roll this just here under the car. It's always good to have a secondary thing for the car to land on, rather than landing on the floor or worse still, your head. If we look at the hub, you see that the disc is fitted onto the back of the wheel hub. So consequently, we will need to take this part off before we can get to the actual disc. Now to do that, first thing we need to do is to remove the caliper. I'm actually going to remove the pads first, which are obviously held in place by these pins. So you just pull out the R pins, although that one doesn't seem to have had one. Looks good, isn't it? A missing pin on there. Now you just pull out these retaining pins and you get this spring part comes out as well. Now in an ideal world, you'd be replacing the pads. In fact, normally you'd be replacing the pads if you're replacing the disc. The reason why I'm not going to is that they've not actually been in long. It's probably a bit of a cheat, but they were new when they went in a month or so back, and obviously they had to put the old disc back on. So anyway, there's plenty of wear left in them. They look fairly even across the surface, so I'm going to put them on top of the new disc. Now on the back of the caliper there are 2 bolts, one up here, one down there, that hold it to the back of the, I don't know, what would you call it, the dust shield that sits behind the brake disc. Now on the other side they've fitted the brake pipe just in front of where the nut is at the top, which is really helpful. And that means you can't actually get to the nut with a socket. No. obviously if you're a mechanic who's got a 2-post lift or 4-post lift, you'd be doing this from underneath, which will make life probably a whole lot easier, because you're not trying to work backwards on yourself. So before I take it off, just have handy a long cable tie so that I'm ready to tie it up onto the top wishbone, just because it's a heavy lump. You don't really want that hanging on the kind of copper brake pipe or on the flexi. I also watch out for, at this stage, there could well be some shims on these bolts, sort of to space the caliper away from the disc properly. There was on the other side, it actually isn't on this side. Right, so get that through there. There you go, so that's tied up. I've actually got a couple of cable ties, because particularly when you're putting the thing back on, I found that I had to take it on and off a couple of times to sort out the shims. There's the hub. This is what I want to get off. And so the next thing to get off is actually this hub cap. And the way to do that, apparently, is just a small flat screwdriver. Just tap it a couple of times, he says, and it should, there you go, get into sort of behind the flange of the hubcap. Just work it round. Okay, so this is where things start to get a little bit messy, because there's grease everywhere under here. And obviously remember that grease and brake discs don't really mix. There you go. So all that is a little cap. Got some grease in it, fairly new grease, doesn't look too black, but I'll clean that out and put some new grease in before it goes back on. So the next thing we're interested in is under this kind of gob of grease here. It's really hard to see anything with that grease on, so you've got to clean it off really. And once you do, you should be able to see underneath a castellated nut, a hub nut, and a split pin. So the split pin, if we just straighten that out, and then we should be able to just pull it out. If we straightened it enough, we could just pull it out. There you go. Now this hub nut should be just finger tight. So the one on the other side was finger tight. This one doesn't seem to be. This one seems to be a bit stronger. So let's see what size that is. Hopefully not the same size as anything else I've got out. It looks like it's a 20mm. So I need to go find a 20mm. So would you believe my socket set doesn't go up to 20mm? So adjustable. There you go. It wasn't finger tight, but it wasn't far off. It's just nipped up beyond finger tight. You don't want it too tight, because the too tighter you have that, the hub won't move, and you need it to be able to sort of freewheel like that. So worth at this point having something clean to just drop these things into. Because you kind of wipe them off, but you don't want them getting too much grit in them, or any really, into that grease. So when we then now take off the hub and disc together, what will come out of here is this thrust washer, and behind that is the bearing, the sort of outer wheel bearing. Okay, so what I've done here, just to make the next part easier, is I've fixed the hub back onto the inside of the wheel that I took off, because I need to undo these 4 nuts to take the disc off the back of the hub, and it makes it a lot easier if it's secure on the back of the wheel. Now each of these bolts should have a little sprung washer sort of attached, so make sure you don't lose those. It's not going to be off for long because very shortly we're putting the new disc on. Right, so that's all the bolts out, and they should just lift up. There you go, that's the old disc gone. And you need to get a new disc. But before we do, just quick clean up of that hub. It's relatively clean anyway, because as I said, the garage swapped the discs over not long ago. Let's get the new disc. Now I've already checked the disc. But what you might want to do is just check it up against the old one, just to make sure it's the same size, same thickness and such, same hole pattern. It should be, but you never know. And it goes in that way round with the sort of the dish facing outwards, or it would be inwards when it's in place. Now we've got to do a quick clean up of those bolts and spring washers, and they can go back in. Obviously at all these points it's important to make sure that things are seated correctly. You don't want it sort of out by anything really. That was one of the issues with the old discs, or the old new discs, was the run out, and so it's effectively like a, well, for those of you old enough to remember 12-inch records, if a 12-inch record got a little bit warped, it would kind of wobble over the disc, over the turntable. So it kind of was doing that, not to the same degree, but just a little bit is enough to make the brakes shudder. I'm going to do these up hand tight to start with, but there is a torque setting, and handily that torque setting's in the manual at pound per foot, which I've converted to Newton meters, and it gives a range, but I'm going for 40 Newton meters, which is about, I think, about 30 pounds per square foot. No, I don't mean pounds per square foot, pounds per foot. Right. So on with the torque wrench. And I've set this to, as I said, I did have it set to 40 Newton meters. The next thing I've got to do is to get this off the back of the wheel and back onto the hub, but before I do that, I'm just going to give the back, what will be the back of the brake disc, a bit of cleaner. I might have to give it a bit more at some point because I don't, my hands have got grease on them and it could well go on the back, but just gives it a decent clean whilst you can get at it. You think it's clean, but look, dirty enough. Might as well give this this dust plate a bit of a clean as well. And I'm surprised how dirty this bit is because, as I said, the things have been changed before, but they didn't clean those faces. And given that sort of the amount of crud on that surface sort of determines how close the calipers might be to the discs. Let's give that a good clean, get that off. Put new grease on this hub, on the axle. What I need to do is to put a big gob of grease onto the axle. Now this is just multi-purpose grease. I think the only thing that really matters is it's kind of recent, it's not old. It's within the sort of manufacturer's guidelines as to how long you should keep it. Now at this point you could switch to rubber gloves or the sort of nitrile gloves. It just takes so long to get on and off. So here we go. Now what's happened, which happened on the other one, is that when I turned the hub over, is the outer bearing and the thrust washer came out. Now that's okay, just got to remember which way you go back in, and also just want to give them a clean and a bit of grease. I'll put the bearing back in. In case you're wondering, it has got a slight taper on it, so the taper goes in, the narrowest end goes in first. The last thing to go back on, almost last thing to go back on there, is the castellated nut, hub nut. Make sure it's on the right thread. Okay, that's better. So I said it goes on kind of hand tight. Nipped up a little bit, and then you need a split pin. Now you could probably use the one that you've taken out, but I'm going to find a new one. And if you've got things lined up properly, there should be a hole through the axle, through the thread. You can either bend one or both legs of the pin. Because all it's doing really is just stopping that nut from coming any further forward, spinning off, because that ultimately would mean all sorts of things could come off. The whole disc and everything would come off, or would just be held in by the calipers. Clean out the hubcap. Nice load of grease in there. And try and get it seated as square as possible. And when you hammer it in, you get a lovely sort of squeeze and nice ooze of the grease out from the sides, and also there's a little tiny sort of air escape hole on the very end of it. And then finally, as you can see, you've got, you know, kind of a bit of grease on there. Give the brake disc a bit of a clean from this side. Okay, let's see if we can get this caliper back on and nice and kind of aligned. So I've got everything to hand because I'm sat like this. I really don't want to have to get up again. First thing to do is cut that, get rid of that cable tie so I can put this back on. So I've just got the bolts held there loosely, which just sort of holds the caliper in place. Because what I want to check is that the disc spins without any sort of grinding onto the caliper. So if you see there, if I push them both in, it's scraping on something. So just need to see whereabouts it's scraping, which side. Actually, I might be alright without any shims. I'll just do them up tight now to see what. Do them up tight to see whether or not that's true. That seems to be nice and aligned. So I'll just nip those up a bit properly tight. It's looking like we'd be good to go without any shims. If we did need to shim, all it is these little really thin washers, and you've got a number of these ones, and you can put these in sort of between the caliper and the dust shield at the back, just to kind of move it sort of out inwards and outwards, top or bottom, to get it aligned. Now there is a torque setting for these bolts on the back, but the issue is I can't get a socket onto them or to be able to get a torqued up, but I can remember how tight they were, so just make sure they're really nipped up tight. Right, that's good. and that's still free. No grinding, that's good. What we need to do now is put the pads back in. Before I do that, I can use this spreader tool just to make sure that the pistons are sort of, you know, as far in as possible. Just need to pop the pads back in now. So if I do the bottom one first, it makes getting this spring thing in slightly easier. Okay, now for these little R pins, one of which was missing. This is the tricky bit because I can't actually see where the hole is. It's almost a bit like doing it by feel. Okay, it's one in. So if I could put them the other side so it makes life a little easier, put them on the outside, but I don't think that's where they're supposed to go. Need two in there on the inside. Right, it's got them both in, just need to push them in home. Good. Just need to double check the disc is clean. And it's still freewheeling, which is great. So we need to get the wheel back on and sort of just tighten up the nuts, and we'll then drop the car. So I can't tighten these up just now. They're hand tight. The wheel's still turning freely, so all good. So all I need to do now, jack the car back up, take the axle stands out and drop it back again. And then, before I go anywhere, drive anywhere much, I need to just give the brakes a bit of a run, just to let the pressure build up again behind the pistons, so that the pads grab onto the disc, and fingers crossed all is good. So all going well, that's sorted the brake discs at the front. I'll take it for the test drive just to make sure, and I'll let you know. But it's a bit of quite satisfying to do that. Not least because I've probably saved, what, £250–300 by not having a mechanics do that. That's taken me most of the morning, you know, maybe a couple of hours, hour and a half, couple of hours each side. So really pleased. Okay, so please like this video, leave me a comment. By all means subscribe if you like these kind of things. There's lots of things going on with the Lotus Esprit, but also other cars I get to drive. But anyway, see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.